In episode 25, titled Produce a Privacy Impact Assessment, the mission is to craft a document that explains privacy risks and the mitigations that tame them without drowning the reader in abstractions. A Privacy Impact Assessment, PIA, is the narrative of how a system touches people through their data, why those touches are necessary, where harm could arise, and how the design prevents or limits that harm. Strong PIA writing respects two audiences at once: everyday users who deserve plain explanations and reviewers who need enough detail to test the claims. The best versions read like an engineering story told with legal discipline, connecting purpose to practice and practice to proof, so that the reader can trace every assertion to a concrete control or artifact.
A durable PIA starts with purpose, because purpose anchors legitimacy. Describe what the collection enables in business or mission terms. Then spell out compatible uses that remain faithful to that original promise. Compatible use means a reasonable person would expect the new use given the original notice and context, not a backdoor expansion justified by convenience. When purpose is precise, scope becomes containable. You can say which data you collect, why each element is needed, and which elements you deliberately refuse to gather. This framing prevents slow creep into secondary use, and it gives lawyers and engineers a shared yardstick to test new features against the original charter. Mapping the data lifecycle transforms slogans into a verifiable path. The PIA should follow each data element from collection to processing to storage to sharing and finally to disposal, noting the systems, regions, and roles that participate at each stage. Collection includes both direct user input and passive signals like telemetry or logs. Processing includes transformations, joins, or inferences that make the data more powerful and potentially more sensitive. Storage describes concrete repositories with security classifications, retention schedules, and encryption choices, while sharing details recipients, purposes, and safeguards. Disposal names triggers and methods such as deletion, anonymization, or aggregation and ties them to policy and technical enforcement. When the life cycle is visible, risk is no longer hidden in the seams between teams.
Data minimization deserves its own argument, not a hand wave. The PIA should explain which fields are strictly necessary, which were removed during design, and what alternatives were considered, such as deriving coarse grain signals instead of holding raw detail. For instance, storing an age band rather than a birth date may preserve utility while reducing re-identification potential, and hashing a device identifier can preserve session continuity without enabling cross-service tracking. Minimization also includes time. If the use case expires, so should the data. Recording these choices makes the design defensible, and it creates a habit where adding a data element requires an explicit justification instead of a default collect everything impulse. Consent, notice, and user rights translate respect into tangible experiences. The PIA describes what users are told, when they are told it, and how language and placement make the message understandable rather than perfunctory. Where consent is the legal basis, explain the mechanism for obtaining, recording, and withdrawing consent, and the consequences of withdrawal for service functionality. Where consent is not the basis, clarify the legal authority or legitimate interest and provide access and correction rights consistent with jurisdictional requirements. This section should connect promises to interfaces, preference centers, export and deletion tools, and support workflows that handle identity verification without creating new risks. Clarity here prevents future disputes because the rules are visible and actionable. Access controls and least privilege are the spine of privacy protection. The PIA should define roles that can view or manipulate personal data, the conditions under which they may act, and the approvals that gate exceptional access. Least privilege means mapping each role to the smallest useful set of data and operations, not granting blanket rights because they are easy to administer. Describe authentication strength, multi-factor requirements, session management, and break glass procedures with audit bounds, and call out how service-to-service access is scoped through tokens with narrow claims. When a reviewer asks, who can see this field and why, the answer should be quick, precise, and supported by configuration and logs rather than institutional memory. Transparency and accountability show up as instrumentation and reporting rather than slogans. Auditing should record who accessed which records, what actions they took, and whether those actions were within policy, then surface exceptions to humans who can intervene. Accountability ties to ownership. Identify the data steward, the privacy officer, and the engineering leads who own fixes when audits or incidents reveal gaps. Breach notification practices should be spelled out at a principal level. What qualifies as a notifiable breach in the relevant jurisdictions, who makes that determination, what clocks start, and what evidence will support disclosures. This paragraph is where promises meet timers, and it should feel operational rather than aspirational. Third-party sharing expands the trust boundary and therefore the diligence required. The PIA identifies each partner or vendor that receives personal data, the exact elements shared, the purpose, the frequency, and the safeguards on both sides. Contracts should bind the partner to equal or stronger protections, include sub-processor approval controls, articulate return or destruction on termination, and allow audits or attestations appropriate to the risk. Oversight responsibilities matter. Name who reviews the partner's compliance evidence, how often, and what triggers a pause or termination. Many privacy failures start as supply chain oversights. This section preempts that failure by treating sharing as an operational workflow with clear owners and thresholds. Residual risk assessment is honest arithmetic, not wishful thinking. After listing controls, identify what remains. Re-identification risk from rich combinations. Insider misuse that escapes detection, data subject harm if a partner fails, or errors made during manual processes. For each residual risk, record likelihood, potential impact, and the mitigation roadmap with milestones, budgets, and owners. Planned remediation might include tightening token scopes, implementing stronger deletion guarantees, expanding data subject tooling, or replacing a vendor that cannot meet encryption commitments. The goal is not zero risk. The goal is documented, proportional risk with a credible plan to reduce it over time and checkpoints that verify progress. A predictable pitfall is copying generic language that bears little resemblance to the system's actual data flows. Reviewers spot this quickly when words promise end-to-end encryption while diagrams and logs show unencrypted processing stages, or when a template claims no PII collected while service tickets display email addresses in clear text. The cure is disciplined specificity. Write what you do and do what you write, with examples and pointers to real artifacts. Replace boilerplate with concrete parameters, repositories, partner names, and retention durations. When prose and reality align, trust rises and review cycles shorten because everyone is working from the same picture. A pragmatic accelerator is to reuse privacy threshold analysis, PTA, inputs and deepen them rather than starting from a blank page. The PTA already lists data elements, sources, authorities, storage, sharing, and a preliminary risk view. In the PIA, expand each item with evidence, controls, measurements, and design alternatives considered. For example, a PTA statement that logs include IP addresses becomes, in the PIA, an explanation of truncation, retention limits, access scoping for analysts, and the justification for keeping IP fragments to investigate fraud. This reuse preserves alignment between documents and ensures that earlier triage evolves into mature safeguards without contradictory statements. Consider a realistic scenario where product analytics are added to understand feature adoption. The team applies pseudonymization so records cannot be linked directly to account identities, and it restricts joining keys to a narrow service that gates re-identification. The PIA must update data maps to show new collection points, document the pseudonymization process, state retention for raw and derived datasets, and identify who may perform re-identification under what approval and logging. It should also recheck notices to users and, if necessary, refresh consent or provide opt-out paths. This scenario shows how the PIA adapts to change by folding new facts into the lifecycle rather than treating privacy as a one-and-done ceremony. Before closing, perform a checkpoint review that ties the document into a tight loop. Purpose clarity, lifecycle mapping, control strength and fit, third-party sharing discipline, residual risk articulation, and updates captured from recent changes. This review is not a rhetorical flourish. It is a sanity test that the narrative still matches the system and that the most consequential choices are justified with current facts. If anything feels hand-wavy, that is the signal to hunt down the missing artifact or decision record. A short standing agenda for this checkpoint, kept by the privacy officer and system owner, prevents drift and keeps the PIA connected to real operations. A last thought to convert prose into action and closure. Finalizing the Privacy Impact Assessment, PIA, means validating that the claims are evidenced, approvals are obtained from the privacy officer, counsel where required, and the authorizing official, and that distribution lists are defined so the right people actually read what they are accountable for. The next action is to circulate the PIA for signatures and schedule the first periodic review date on the calendar, tying it to product planning so updates track real changes. When a PIA lives on that cadence, purpose anchored, lifecycle mapped, controls tested, sharing governed, residual risks managed, it becomes more than compliance text. It becomes the organization's memory for why people's data is handled with care and how that care is proved repeatedly and transparently. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.